Hey guys, what's going on? This is David Chen. You're on another edition of New York Weekly's #1 podcast, Pandanomics, and we are entering a beautiful time in spring, which means winter is dissipating. Spring is a time of growth, of resilience, of hope and faith, most certainly this weekend. And let's talk about faith and amazing things. My friend, Erik Lapaglia, the one and only from Miami NFT Week. Erik, how you doing, my friend?
David, I'm outstanding. How are you doing, brother?
Great. You had an amazing conference last weekend. The buzz was still there. You were killing it with an amazing conference and setup. Tell us a little bit about Miami NFT Week and what you guys are doing.
I think probably a lot of your audience has been exposed to conferences, maybe in the NFT or crypto space. We look to be a little different just from the respect. It doesn't sit well with me when I go to many of these conferences, and I get to. I get to speak around the world, much like you do as well. And it seems to be a lot of the same folks, and specifically, it's a lot of the same guys who are speaking. And so, one thing we just start right from a foundational level is we want our speaker lineup to look different than it does at other conferences. And so that means having women, Black and brown founders, projects that are maybe not getting the attention or the limelight at other places. We make sure that they have a place for us. And then the trickle over, or kind of the spillover effect of that, is that our audience looks a lot like what Miami is right now. Obviously, Miami historically has been the capital of Latin and South America. And so we have a huge LatAm audience. We lean into that. We have programming around that. We're really the only conference I know of that's talking about the intersection of where things go, not only for NFTs, crypto, Web3, but also how that affects Latin and South America and the Caribbean as well.
It's amazing because you're always thinking about where Miami is sitting and how important crypto and NFT is towards not just the world, but in particular into Central and South America, where there are countries that use amazing crypto, man. I mean, I hear you, dude. We connected pretty unusually, as usually as my life is, and anyone here knows that follows us. I always believe in good energy, and we connected, randomly. And I felt what's funny is then we were going to have an event, and you'd message me, so I was going to be in town, and you had your amazing event the following week. And I talk about these events and the things that you're doing, and I always talk about experience, right? And you hit it on the knot. You talk about all the different speakers that are there, the variety of different people to show the different demographics. Because when we're talking about crypto, we know that majority of the people are literally 25, 35 and under. They're our gamer target audience. They're active in what they're trying to do. And a big percentage is actually Asian, right? Which is almost 70% of the market. And when you look at these conferences, I think with the exception of a couple of people, even the perspective of what the uses of it, it's not real world use, right? The way it has to be. You kind of shifted that around. What were your founding principles of doing something like that, man?
Well, as a kid, I grew up in a house with 5 women, so that probably gave me just a different worldview about being
beautiful
inclusive.
Women.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. And so, as an extension of that, I also grew up in the Bay Area, and I was a minority. I just simply was. The Asian community was larger where I grew up than it was the whiter, Caucasian community. And so I got in touch with that cultural side, and I was very open to it. And I'll be honest, for me, the most bullish region of the world around crypto, Web3, what we do, is the VIP region, which is Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. It's roughly 550 million people, so it's kind of the same trading zone as NAFTA, except they have an unquenchable thirst for all things Web3. They've got a friendly governmental structure around crypto and even a regulatory environment. And so if I looked at one spot on the globe and I said, if I could only do business here, it would be that region.
The region itself is such an important region. Most of my career at Deloitte was based in Latin America. I think everyone knows that I was based out of Mexico, and a lot of the Asian business that came through the Americas from my 05 to 15 I brought in. And what I've learned is when you talk about NFT, you talk about free trade zone, you talk about the abilities of production and the levels you're saying about, there's such a cross collaboration, right? You talk about remittance and the ability and how that affects, the financial status of the countries as a whole. And then you talk about crypto and the need of what that's going through, man. I mean, you look at these markets now, you look at the people that are on Forbes, you see where we're sitting in the NFT world. Where do you really, like, how do you see it, man? Because I got my questions and my doubts on kind of the way people were looking at the investors and how they're investing in certain brands and products. And I think that was a fair tell that real world usage was probably more needed than anyone thought about it. But what do you think about the status right now?
I think that I feel unbelievably bad for the folks that, especially on the NFT side, who are holding bags and projects that are down 80, 90, 95%. But it was what I would refer to as a needed phase. Like the Ape of the Week project had to come and go. Now we can get into what's really the most important thing, which is the foundational level where we start building what's going to be the next iteration of the internet. And I believe two things to be fundamentally true. A, that the internet's not going anywhere, and B, that the next version of the internet is primarily going to be built on chain. So if I believe those two things to be true, it's incumbent upon me to not only focus my energy and my attention and my capital to that end, but also find people who are building in that space the foundational building blocks of what that's going to look like.
Yeah, it's funny, man. I was just speaking in a class last week at ASU, a master's class, and it was a crypto metaverse class. And I was talking about that in the trends, and I look at it, and I think the biggest issue is there is an unfortunate miseducation that had to happen for it to balance out what it had to balance out. But at the end of the day, I think the hardest part is trying to understand the markets and then who the management is behind the actual business. And I think when you look at business as a whole, like I talk about when I was in Phase, man, when I first invested in there, I have no idea at that point how big Faceland was. I just knew that they had 10 billion viewers and 350 million subscribers. And I just knew qualitative numbers. Qualitative valuation is the name of the game. I think when people educate themselves and they look at the valuation and they're looking at these placeholders of good projects, the biggest thing is like, you buy here, it's going to raise. You buy here, it's going to raise. But what is actually the income coming in and generating out? What is that really going to give you? What is the benefit of it? And I think a lot of times when people were talking about it, they let greed take over common sense, And that's where it gets hard because it's very easy, dude. In my opinion, look, it's really easy right now to shit on a bunch of people. But when it was at whatever number was at, you chose at that point not to sell because greed was there or to buy in. That was a choice. But at the end of the day, you got to look at management, man. And I think you're 100% on the money. I think that has to change on the current projects to make it work.
David, common sense is unfortunately none too common nowadays. So it's just where we are in the world. And I, in no small part, I blame this thing. It's this instant gratification, no attention span society that we've become. And so people really, they're looking for the next shiny object and they're not looking at the stuff that's going to have lasting enterprise value. And I'll just speak to me, what I look for when I'm looking for great projects or things to invest into. I look for the founding crew. I look for the people behind it because I'll say it more plainly. There are only like two ways that I invest. I invest in the people, and every time I've invested in the people, I've made money. Because the product, the service, the company can all be fungible. It can all change. Every time I've ever invested in an idea is when I've lost my ass. It's because I fell in love with an idea and I didn't look for product fit. I didn't look for a great team behind it. It's just like, oh, that's dope. And I've lost my shirt every single time. And so I have to look for great people to get to do business with, or otherwise I'm just wasting my own time. I don't have life to do that. Like maybe you have better resources or a better team in place, but I'm hypersensitive to how I spend my 1,440 minutes every single day. And so those non-refundable minutes that I'm going to invest into companies that I'm invested in or that I'm advising to, I want those to be great people that I'd want to be around regardless of whether we're doing business or not.
And that's where the money, that's where you're hitting on the money. In the world that we're in crypto and NFTs, I remember when I spoke at one of the conferences in Vegas, and I said, I remember in 2017, 18, what it was like to be called a rugger, but it wasn't a rugger. What it was like to deal and help people at your best bet to make this business work. And then when it single-handedly collapsed, the guilt that you felt as a business person, right? And I think a lot of times, even the guys who are building this practice, I caution them because I've never had my own coin, right? Not that I couldn't put one together or I didn't have the people. We talk about this. We've never had our, not because it's not there, but because there's a cautionary tale that comes with it. Unless you know the whole spectrum, you don't necessarily want to dive in and put your brand on it because then it destroys it long term, you know? And I don't think a lot of people see it that way.
That's the problem is a lot of people don't realize the blockchain lives forever. So if you're going to do something, be intentional about it. It's the same reason that I think blockchain will be massively disruptive to contract laws specifically, because a huge percentage of litigation in the United States is born from contract disputes. And so once you memorialize a contract on chain, it is there forever. But the front end of that is you better get it right because it is on there forever. And it's the same thing with these coins or these projects that people put out. Like it was foreseeable to me, especially around the NFT buzz that was going on, say, a year, 18 months ago. I spoke to so many early stage like founders, and they had a great idea, or maybe they had some really sick art, but none of them had business acumen. They didn't understand that it is not a sustainable business model to have a drop and then be like, well, what do we do? What's a business from that? And that's what so many of these projects have done. And some of them have been able to pick up the mantle and go out and do additional raises or do collaborations and other things. But even like, the gold standard, which you'd probably call Yuga right now, they've made their fair share of mistakes as well. And so I think that's the biggest problem when you have an early industry like this and that explodes from zero then to billions in market activity. Everybody's in that cash grab phase and they're not really thinking about long-term ramifications.
It's interesting you said that because as I was watching this market, I remember telling my friend Vito and his big group, which is part of Big Deals, for the last probably 2 years, we called out almost every trend that was possibly happening. And we talk about this utility play. We talk about NFTs. And we talk about the sole purpose of this whole thing was to help people from displaced areas become better, have a chance, an actual chance. And we forgot that part. And when we are on stage, when we're running to find sponsors, when we're trying to find people in industry, people of like-mindedness, it's very hard, I think, as a whole to find that group. But when you do, it is an insatiable, powerful group of human beings who are going to make the changes, are going to make the differences because they realize it's bigger than them. It's about humanity, right? And that's why you did what you did with Miami NFT, right? It wasn't about making the money. It was about letting people in the regions know why it was important and understand and educate and learn so that they could change their lives, right? That's why we're together, because without us ever telling us each other that's why we know we're together, right? When you see guys out there in the crypto market who aren't like that, and you caution the young guys that are listening to the story, what advice would you give them on being careful of what they shouldn't be looking at doing and just your advice on it?
Well, my experience is success leaves clues. And so look at people who are already successful. And okay, this industry probably doesn't offer 20 years or 100 years of track record of success because it's not been around that long. But how can I employ the principles of other successful people in other verticals and then put them into what I'm doing in crypto or Web3? And that is absolutely applicable. So just core tenets. drive customer lifetime value, create a raving fan culture, offer real world resources. Like, the reason I'm so excited about where we go from here is the last number that I saw reported by Gartner a couple months ago was there's roughly 150 million wallets, crypto wallets in the world right now. There's 7.234 billion people in the world. That is a massive market opportunity. Like, if there's never been a market opportunity, probably in our lifetimes, maybe, the steam engine or other industrial revolution-esque moments offered that sort of a market opportunity. But where we go from here in blockchain, I think, is going to be that inflection point where we can look back in, as little as 7 or 10 years, but certainly 20 years down the road and say, oh my gosh, you had to be in that industry. You had to participate in that, because if you didn't, you missed the boat. Like, it is unfathomable to me that in today's world, in the 54 countries that make up Africa, the number one store of value, the number one currency that is traded for goods and services is still prepaid mobile minutes. And the only reason that that is the case is because it's a predictable store of value in a continent that has 54 different currencies that can wildly gestate and swing all over the place. And so people want certainty. Crypto offers that. Crypto transcends. I had to send a wire today, and I had to spend a bunch of time on the phone and get a couple of phone calls back to send a domestic wire. Like, you don't have to do that anymore. It doesn't have to be that way. But we're still building the pipes and the infrastructure to be able to make that a more ubiquitous transaction where I can fund any sort of business dealing via my crypto wallet, and I don't have to call up XYZ Bank to get it done.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's just more efficiency and fluidity, right? Things that you can do, and things that matter. As you're seeing this, where do you see, I see the next evolution of NFTs and cryptos to be surrounded by what I like to call 2.0, which means they have to have current usage, real utilities, real IRL events, real opportunities in gaming, to where they can actually now the transactability of that. That's where I see it headed. Where do you see it headed?
I mean, I think those things are important. I think that you need to look at ways where it can pass the soccer mom test. And so it needs to be an NFT that they don't know is an NFT. One thing Starbucks, I think, has done a masterful job thus far is they've really not uttered the word NFT in their new Odyssey program. Even though it's all built on chain, it's built on Polygon, everything that they've done now, they've redesigned their digital wallet, if you will, but they're not talking about it to the front facing audience. They're just saying, hey, it's a better digital mousetrap. And we've been dealing with digital things for quite some time. So one domino that I already honestly expected to fall, and now with Ticketmaster's announcement a couple of weeks ago, I think we will be on the cusp of it, is digital ticketing. There's a huge X factor that these sports leagues and these issuers of tickets are not participating in, and it's the delta between when they sell a ticket one time and that's the only time they get a chance to derive that revenue, and the second and third and fifth time that ticket trades in secondary market activity. I don't know about you. I've also bought bogus tickets. I remember distinctly buying some courtside tickets to the Wizards Warriors game, and I go up to, the Wizards arena, and the dude's like, hey, these aren't real tickets. They sure as hell looked real, but I got taken. If it's an NFT, that's never going to happen. And that in and of itself is useful enough. But for these teams, it's this paradigm shift of revenue opportunity where they can put a small token revenue like royalty on there and derive just simply accretive revenue to the bottom line.
When you look at that, and you talk about that, I see that combination with the gaming digital side, because when we talk about gaming, it's access to an audience of 3 billion people that, quite frankly, needs access to this. A lot of third world countries, right? So, that's when we talk about the unique side of it. But what I really find interesting is when you can do an entry ticket with NFTs and use that digital granting access to tournaments, right? To the different events and experiences. Those NFTs they're limited, right? And they create that urgency so that people can continue to be at these events, at these tournaments where they can win these different collectibles going from there. And now there's a real IRL fan engagement. Now there's real content side that's being created, right? And I think that's a narrative in the shift that, like, when you talk about the real case use of it, because the other thing is when they're creating games and systems utility use, I ask them, like, well, how do you test out your brand and product? If you're a game, the only way that, to me, that a game makes sense is it can't obviously suck and gamers want to play it. But then if it's part of an official league, it makes it official, right? Yeah. And that's where I see a lot of that value coming in too. But the thing is, it's not like it's the rules are the same rules. The template's the same template. But if you were to call it NFT, you could call it a membership, you could call it a reward system, you call it whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, that's the same principle and concept. And everybody they overcomplicated it, right? Yeah. But now with the people that are out, I think when you put those things together and create those engagements, you're going to get that experience like you guys have at Miami NFT and other places that quite singularly will set everything else apart.
You touched on gaming. I mean, gaming's a $360 billion plus a year industry. Like, it's ripe for disruption through digital assets, but interoperable digital assets, because there have been digital assets for purchase in gaming for quite some time. The problem is they're not interoperable. You can't take them out of the ecosystem, and really, they're not yours. They're yours within the auspice of a single title. So if they're issued on chain, it becomes an asset that you can actually pull out of that ecosystem and trade for possibly other goods and services. So it actually will have an amplifier effect on gaming specifically. But then how you make it even more valuable is you can offer these brand partnerships where it becomes IRL or it becomes redeemable for other goods and services. So like that's such an interesting thread to pull on. I'm fascinated to see where we go from here. And gaming's not going to get any smaller. I mean, we've gamified pretty much every aspect of our life. And it's one thing that's really been resonant with audiences is, kind of making things fun to do. And so that's why you saw Robinhood explode. It was almost like a game that people were playing when they were investing in the equities market.
Yeah, and that's the point, right? The point is that if it's not fun, it doesn't matter. If it's not cool, it doesn't make any sense. And you're totally talking about that and 100% of its actual value. I think people forget the most important thing is the polishment of that brand. You talk about Starbucks. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? And it's how you package the product. When you talk about these things and pushing that together, that to me is such a crazy audience because all of gaming was more than all of Hollywood and music combined. And I sat there on the front lines talking to music executives all day long, right? Talking to movie guys all day long, trying to do the gaming stuff, crypto companies all day long. And what we realized is the one thing you realize is we have, just like you have, a responsibility to make sure that the guys we're working with are the right guys, right? And that's how we have stayed around long enough in the market. And I caution that to the young people because sometimes quick money is never the best money.
No, I was actually just doing Sean Kelly's podcast and we were talking about this. Shout out to Sean. I know we know. Yeah. But he was super successful young, but he got good counsel. He got around great people. And so I use this phrase a lot and I used it earlier. Success leaves clues. Like the only way I know, I don't have life to learn something like mastery takes, they say 10,000 hours. And so the only way I know how to compress time in that regard is to get around people who are doing it at a high level already. And there's a number of ways you can do that. If you're a young kid, maybe it's an internship, or you just model them through their YouTube or other content that you can get access to. When you get a little more advanced like us, sometimes it's literally you write a check. You write a check to a dude's foundation, you're probably going to get access, and they're going to want to answer some questions to you. So I've used that simple principle to great effect. Like, hey, here's somebody that I could never get on the phone otherwise. Let's go find out what they're passionate about. Go stroke a $25,000 or $50,000 check. They're really friendly then.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great method. Intention is everything, man. And I love the strategy that you're doing. That I know with me, like our foundation, when we do our events, people, I mean, you said it, people that get to me at a much cheaper, quicker rate is they donate to the foundation, and I know you care, and therefore I'll talk to you. And I think, but that really does matter, because that let me tell what Erik just did, everyone, for everyone to understand this. It did two things. He actually gave a darn about the person. That's what he just said. And two, what mattered to that person. That was that connection we talk about. Now, this is master level learning. We're going to go Yoda level right here, right, between me and Erik, but it's Yoda level. And that is what it is, because it has that connection. And that means everything in business, right? Everyone's busy, but we all understand that, but it's the intention. And that's great intention, man. I love that. Is there, as you're looking at the market with crypto and NFT and gaming, then you see the regular business market, the up and downs in the economy, right? And as a business person, where do you see some of the opportunities that exist from this current market? What are your opinions on that?
Well, if you listen to economists, and I try and pay attention to that, although you get 10 economists in a room, you're going to get 9 different opinions. But to hear what they're having to say, they think that the second half of this year is going to be really rough. So I think as an investor, it's incumbent to have some level of dry powder that you're have on the sidelines and ready to be deployed as opportunities present. But I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth when I say that, because with saying that, I've never been more bullish about where we go from here. I am seeing so many amazing companies and projects getting presented to me almost on a daily basis. I think the biggest thing that I want to see over the next, say, year to 18 months is some normalization around what the terminology of this space is. You touched on it earlier. Like, we're a decentralized industry, and one of the problems with that is we can often not agree upon what is the same thing. Like most times in life, you can say, "Hey, this is a purple can of sparkling water," and like we can all agree on that. But if you had this can in Web3, it's going to be like, well, is that a phygital because it's tied to, a digital twin, or is it, really there? Like, and I know it sounds so stupid to say that, but like we need to get a better framework for what we're actually all talking about. Like, and I'll use an example. Metaverse. You ask somebody what a metaverse is right now, you're going to get 100 different answers. I am waiting for the moment where we just can mutually agree that a metaverse is a more immersive version of a website. It can be a lot more than that, but at its base level, let's just agree that that's what it is. And so we can all move forward and have a better framework to have conversations. And it's one of the reasons I think we're struggling with regulatory framework, not only in this country, but around the globe, is often the luminaries in the space can't agree around what we're talking about. And so how on earth do you expect elected officials and regulators who aren't subject matter experts in the area to agree about what should be done about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. They're not subject matters experts in the area, yet they're trying to run the regulatory framework and the understanding of it. And then when you look at the same principles of other markets that might be currently regulated, the principles don't necessarily agree with markets that aren't quote unquote regulated, because the principles exist, right? Whether you're somebody who has the opportunity to be working for the government and having the ability to know which stocks to buy ahead of time, right? In our world, it's not a fair thing, right? But those are the things that when you talk about those trends, that I always tell people, you have to look at what the common sense practice is, what the arm's length practice is. If it doesn't pass the SEC in general, everyone's going to want their taxes. Everyone's going to want a percentage. They're going to want documentation. I think for a good business to be ahead of the game, they have to understand that framework, right? And by that framework, now they can incorporate their ideas. But what happens is they do their ideas in the framework, and it's backwards. And it can't be backwards, because the reality is, no matter how you want to spin it and do what it does, we have single-handedly shown two things that have existed. One is you look at GameStop and the influence of what gamers can do to Wall Street.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the demographic. And two, look at the current environment and how much it's shifted because we give them an excuse for it to fail to be where it's at. Right. So understanding those two things are going to make that difference, man. And I love that you hit that. Now, let me ask you one more thing, man. when you're doing this and you're doing a lot of things in business, what keeps you aligned and balanced and happy?
I just have some foundational stuff that are absolute musts for me. So I am a daily meditator. That's something that was a gift that was introduced into my life several years ago. And I honestly, I had a lot of contempt prior to investigation around it. But once I really learned how beneficial it can be, and it gave me a pause that is not naturally of myself. I would now no longer do without that than I would without food or water. Like it's that foundational in my life. And I'm very fortunate. I have a great family. I have great friends. So I can also unplug from this. It's the crazy thing about crypto. Crypto never stops. You know, it's a 24/7, 365 market. But you have to have a good enough team in place that you can step away. And so even we talked about the conference, like the only reason that the conference is successful and I'm able to do it is I have an amazing team in place to help facilitate that. Because as much as I want to do, I want to give people the resources to be able to do and to be able to grow. And that's one of the most heartening things that I get to do is working with somebody who's young and maybe doesn't have the skills or the resources, and give them an environment, give them the counsel and the opportunity to learn and model what success looks like. And so that just keeps me super motivated. The other thing too is like I'm a super curious guy by nature, and so I want to see what's next. I want to know more. There is never going to be a point in this industry in my lifetime, I firmly believe, where I feel like, oh, I'm good. I really have a firm grasp on everything that's going on, because there's going to be that next big thing, that next big catalyst or inflection point that's going to change everything. And I'll give you a very relevant example in the last few months. Like, I would not have called out ChatGPT to be the fastest application in human history to get to 100 million users. Yet here it is, and now it is ubiquitous. It is touching so many aspects. I don't know about yours, but certainly my daily life. And that's something that wasn't even relevant to any conversations that you or I were having 6 months ago.
Yeah, and and that's the point, right? It's moving at such a quick speed. They have to keep up with it, and that goes back down to the people you're working with, because speed and knowledge without experience, to me, as older men now, not that much older than we used to be, we understand that maturity and figuring things out make a big difference, and it does make that big difference. I mean, it absolutely does make a big difference with the type of game. And it'll be interesting what they're going to do with AI and gaming and in crypto and NFT together as a whole. And it could be the next super fun, right? Who knows what the opportunities exist there. Erik, as we're wrapping this up, and I wanted to ask you one last thing. What is one piece of advice that you can give our listeners, just anything, whether in business and life, that was very helpful for you?
Wow, that's a tough question, because that's not like I want to give 47 different answers. But I will just say that, like, realize that life is not a do-it-yourself mission. Like, get around great people, and bring them into the process, bring them in, have that trusted circle that you can lean into. Because for a long time, especially when I was younger, I thought that I needed to do it by myself, and the ability to ask for help. And I talked about, getting counsel and compressing time from people who are already doing it at a high level. That's the hack that's made me more successful than any one thing. That's the ability to jump to the front of the line, because I'm not taking 20 or 30 years to have mastery in something. I'm getting around people who are already doing it at that level, and I'm modeling what they've done. So that would probably be a long-winded way of saying that don't think that you have to do this thing called life by yourself.
Absolutely, man. Ego is not your amigo. You're never alone. This is absolutely amazing. Erik, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on a successful Miami NFT week. I can't wait to work with you and see you soon. Erik, now, before I do that, one last thing. Where can people follow you and your websites?
Oh, sure. Everywhere in the world except Instagram, it's just my name, which is Erik Lapaglia, Erik. On Insta, it's Erik Gets Results, Erik Gets Results. And if you have Erik Lapaglia on Instagram, please give it back to me because somebody took it. That's the only reason I'm not Erik Lapaglia on there.
I love it, man. The curiosities of Instagram things with you. For David Chen and my friend Erik, we'll see you guys next week. Thank you on other editions of New York Leads One Podcast, Patanomics. Good night.